Hello and welcome. The theme of the Hindustan Times Leadership Summit 2025 is Transforming Tomorrow. And there cannot be a more fitting moment to host a conversation on the forces transforming the world. We are gathered here just hours after a widely watched and closely tracked visit by Russian President Vladimir Putin. A visit that once again placed India at the center of global attention. At this moment, questions around power, partnerships, and geopolitical balance feel sharper than before. And to help us understand what transpired in those closed rooms, what signals India intended to send, and how New Delhi is reading the shifting currents of global politics from Moscow to Washington, from the Indo-Pacific to our own neighborhood, we have with us the person steering India's foreign policy through these complex and competing pressures. As we look at how nations adapt, respond, and lead in an unsettled world, it is my pleasure to welcome the man who's been shaping India's external engagement with clarity and conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, at the Hindustan Times Leadership Summit, join me in welcoming India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S Jaishankar. Dr. Jaishankar, welcome. Good morning. You just saw Vladimir Putin off. The entire world was tracking what's going on between Delhi and Moscow. To those watching in Europe, to those watching in DC, what was the message the Modi government was sending?
First of all, Rahul, let me say what a pleasure it is to be at the HT Summit. Of course, it's it's particularly tough when you're featured after Hugh Grant. But fortunately, foreign policy is more exciting than any movie currently. So coming to President Putin, I don't think it's just a question of what do you say to those capitals. I think most important, what is it you say in Delhi and Moscow? And why I say that is, there are two aspects to it. For a country like us, a big country rising, expected to occupy a more important place, even more important place. It's very crucial that our key relationships are all in good repair, that we optimize our position, that we maintain as good cooperation as possible with as many important players, and in fact, as many players as possible. And that we have that freedom of choice. That, in many ways, is what, in a nutshell, foreign policy is about. And there, I think, if you look at India-Russia, the world has seen a lot of ups and downs in the last 70, 80 years. I've said this before and I'll say it again. India-Russia has actually been among the steadiest big relationships, big power or big country relationships in the world. I mean, even Russia's own relationship with China or US or Europe has had its ups and downs. Our relationships with, many of these countries have had it so. But one, where Russia is concerned, and I think you can see that also in popular sentiment. There is a feeling in the streets about Russia, which is noteworthy. The second is on the relationship itself. In any relationship, it's natural that some aspects of it develop and some kind of don't keep up. If you take the United States, for example, in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, our economic relationship developed. But there was virtually no defense relationship till after the nuclear deal. In the case of Russia, similarly with Europe, if you look at Europe, we have a very substantive relationship with many European countries, but not necessarily extending to the defense and security sphere. In the case of Russia, what had happened for a variety of reasons, I think they visualized the West and China as their primary economic partners. We visualized perhaps the same. So the economic side of the relationship had somehow not kept pace. And you can see that in the numbers. So this visit in many ways was about reimagining the relationship. It was about building dimensions and facets which it lacked or didn't have in enough measure. So if I were to pick 2 or 3 big takeaways, I mean, for me, the mobility agreement, where Indians would now much more seamlessly find work opportunities in Russia was one big outcome. An understanding on a joint venture on fertilizers. We are the world's second biggest fertilizer importer after Brazil, and it's a huge, it's a recurring issue that we have, and also because the fertilizer sources have been very unstable. They've turned on and turned off the tap. So we had an agreement to create an important, substantial joint venture on fertilizer. In a way, you can say it's food security. And overall, there was a considerable focus on how to bring up the relationship. And actually, President Putin came with a very large business delegation, literally numbering multiple hundreds. So that made it a very different visit.
So you're saying that the focus this time was more on the economic relationship between India and Russia. Defense cooperation and ties have been the central fulcrum of India-Russia ties for a very long time. There was no public conversation about more S-400s being purchased or S-500 being purchased or even the Su-57. Given the fact that China now plays an important role in the supply chains of Russian defense armaments, Dr. Jaishankar, would India be willing to consider buying, say, the Su-57 from Moscow? And how much at the back of your head would be playing the fact that some of the critical tech inside could actually be coming from China?
I would have been surprised if you didn't ask me that question. So the answer is that yes, there was what we call the Intergovernmental Commission, the military technical cooperation side of it meeting. From our side, Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh Ji was the chair, their defense ministers, the Russian co-chair. They had the meetings. But I'm telling you, what the summit itself did. Of course, we have good defense cooperation. Again, it's been a very continuous dimension of our cooperation with Russia. But, where specifics are concerned, that's for the various systems to work out and do in their own way.
You dodged my question, which is fine. You're trying to further India-Russia ties at a time when the United States would have ideally wanted greater strategic alignment, which now seems very, very difficult. But do you think, given that you're in the final stages, or at least attempting to push through the first tranche of an India-US trade deal, President Putin's very public visit to India complicates negotiations with DC?
No, I disagree with you. I think everybody knows that India has relations with all the major countries of the world, and I think for any country to expect to have a veto or a say in how we develop our relations with others is not a reasonable proposition, because remember, the others can expect the same. So I think we've always made it very clear that we have multiple relationships. We have a freedom of choice. We talk about what is called strategic autonomy, and that continues. And I cannot imagine why anybody would have reason to expect the contrary.
Outside of just the joint statement, what was your impression of the mind, given the fact that when President Putin went into Ukraine, so much was said in the Western press about whether he's in control, whether he's fully in charge. You were at the state dinner, and when I saw at Rashtrapati Bhavan last evening, the man has a huge commanding presence. Right at the end, Prime Minister Modi and he went into a corner. They had this one-on-one going on for several minutes. What was your impression of a man, given the perception that the Western press tried to create about a man who was isolated, cut away from others, and not fully in control of his own system?
Well, look, if I wanted a reading about President Putin, I'm not sure I'd go to the Western press for an objective assessment.
Sure. You want to leave it there?
Well, I think that's an answer, isn't it?
Okay. No, so let's build on this further by asking you for a reading of what do you think is happening with American President Donald Trump at the moment. Given the fact that India invested so much, the Prime Minister himself invested so much in the India-America relationship, are you extremely disappointed with the Trump administration and how transactional they're choosing to be?
Well, look, every government and certainly every American president has their own way of approaching the world. I grant you that in the case of President Trump, it's radically different from how his predecessors did. I think he himself would say that. We have right now a set of issues which the relationship is grappling with. I mean, to me, it's, look, foreign policy doesn't always, everything doesn't go your way all the time on all the issues, on all the relationships. So there will be issues, you know. It is with the US today, it could be with somebody else tomorrow. What you try to do is to engage and work through those issues, and we believe that there can be a landing point for our respective trade interests. Obviously, that is something which will be negotiated and negotiated hard because it has an implication for livelihoods in this country. You know, at the end of the day, for us, the interests of the workers and the farmers and the small business and the middle class matters. So when we look at a trade agreement with a country like the United States, you have to be extremely judicious about your position, about what you put on the table.
How optimistic are you at the moment? Are we days away, weeks away, months away, potentially years away from just the first part of the trade deal?
Well, look, diplomacy, you're always optimistic because I'm not saying that as a way of stalling you, which I am, but also because, look, it's suddenly things can turn around. It can turn around on one weekend. I could tell you on Friday, I don't think it's likely, and maybe it'll happen on Monday, and you will think that I was misleading you. So it can happen.
No, with Trump, we totally get it. Given the fact that on the other side of the negotiating table is President Trump, we won't blame you. We'll get why that happened.
We've had, there's no lack of communication. There's no lack of negotiation. It's something which has gone through multiple rounds. We have to see when the call is taken and on what terms. So if you ask me, could it happen soon? My answer would be, sure, very possible. If you say, well, maybe soon may take a little longer, maybe, I don't know.
Dr. Jaishankar, the end of the year is a good time for reflection. Many amongst your peers and those around you consider you one of the sharpest diplomatic brains of your generation. If I ask you to look back at the time of Operation Sindoor, what are the cards or moves that you would have liked to play differently so that India didn't end up in the diplomatic soup that it did with President Trump? Because many in academic and think tank circles would argue that did the diplomats in Delhi get outmaneuvered diplomatically by the generals in Rawalpindi?
Look, let me take it in two parts. I think where India is concerned, there are things we do and there are things we don't. That's why we are India. We have rules, we have norms. If we take any step, we are accountable in this country, accountable to the people, to the media, to the civil society. So, when it's very easy to say these things, but clearly people were, a much more autocratic, oligarchic polity where there are virtually no rules of conduct in pretty much any sphere, can do things which we can't. I think it would be unreal to compare ourselves to them. And in many ways, I think we would be doing ourselves injustice. At the end of the day, we are people with a certain sense of ourselves, with a certain set of rules about how we conduct ourselves and what we do and we don't. And I think that's very important to maintain.
No, but there are people sitting here who've told me in the past that maybe we could have played our cards slightly differently by playing to his ego, indulging him to some extent without giving in on what he wanted to project. That we thank him at some level without necessarily saying that he brokered the ceasefire, that there were ways and means around the box that we ended up in.
It is the fate of every player to have a wiser commentator in the commentator's box. So I would at least respect those commentators who have at least played.
Many of these are past players.
Look, here is a point. There was a certain reality, Now, I think we owe it to ourselves to stay with that reality and stay with that record. And I don't think I need to belabor that point. At the end of the day, we have to stand up for what is our interest and what is our, I would say, view of where the relationship should go and what terms it should go.
Is it fair then to say, Dr. Jaishankar, that the relationship with the United States is moving from a zone of strategic alignment to now being increasingly transactional?
Look, I think clearly right now trade is the most important issue there. It's clearly very central to the thinking in Washington, much more than it was to earlier administrations. It is something which we have recognized, and we are prepared to meet, but we are prepared to meet it on reasonable terms. For those of you who think that diplomacy is about pleasing somebody else, I'm sorry, that's not my view of diplomacy. To me, it is about defending our national interests. It is about saying what are things which my country and my people believe in. I'm not going to give a version out there which does a disservice to my armed forces and my people. Please understand that.
What's your reading of the state of play with China at this time, given the fact that there have been now meetings at the highest level? To what extent have we been able to take the relationship out of the frostiness that we found ourselves in post-Galwan? And what do you see as being the immediate trajectory from here?
Well, look, after October 24, which was when the Kazan meeting happened between Prime Minister and President Xi, we reached an understanding on the last set of friction points at that time. And since then, it's now been a little more than a year. I think by and large, the border areas have remained stable. Patrolling patterns have mostly resumed and are taking place smoothly. So the key point which we made, that peace and tranquility in the border areas is a prerequisite for good relations, is being maintained and is being built upon. But it's not like that was the only issue in the relationship. There were many other issues, some of which predated Galwan. So there are issues about trade. There are issues about investment. There are issues about competition, about subsidies, about fairness, about transparency. These are real issues as well. So I think we are trying to work our way through some of it. Some of it is easier, some of it is harder. For example, air connections, direct air connections had stopped. Now, it, by the way, didn't stop because of Galwan. It stopped because of COVID. But it so happened after Galwan, we didn't restore that. So that one was something we could do. So there would be other parts of it which would be a little bit more complicated. Some will happen, some won't.
Are you willing to now consider settling parts of the border dispute which are easier to settle, or is India's position still that you need to settle the entire gamut of border
No,
issues?
I think, you are now wading into a degree of, I would say, granularity and specificity on
Which
the
is
border
very important.
negotiation. Because it is important, I'm not going to tell you. So,
He's thought through my questions, he's thought through his answers, he knows what to leave. This is almost like net practice rather than, you know exactly what to weave your way around. What's your reading of the extreme concentration of power that we're seeing in Islamabad under the new Chief of Defence Forces? And is that to India's advantage or disadvantage that you've got now Asim Munir so deeply entrenched in power?
look, reflect on, the last 80 years of Pakistan, which has paralleled our own independence era. For the bulk of it, in one way or the other, the military has either been overtly, covertly, in a hybrid manner. Essentially, it's been in command. In some cases, it's more visible and naked in a way. In some cases, it is less so. But what is the important point there is, when we hear people comment on our policies, I reflect sometimes. I have two neighbors, one to the east and one to the west, and the one to the east also has had for a substantial time of the same period, post 47, the military in command. But the military to the east is treated very differently. The military regime to the east is treated very differently from the military regime to the west. So what does it tell you? It tells you at the end of the day that much of the world actually, for all the homilies that you get, really, in reality, when it suits them, they can, turn facts around, upside down and do what they have to do. So in another context, you use the word transactional. In many ways, the world has always been transactional. That there are good terrorists and bad terrorists, there are good military rulers and apparently not so good ones. So I think for us, the reality of the Pakistani army has always been, and much of our problems actually emanate from there. When you look at the terrorism, when you look at the training camps, when you look at the sort of a policy of a kind of, I would say almost ideological hostility towards India, where does that come from? It comes from the army.
Since diplomacy is so much about optionality, given our attacks after Uri and now Pahalgam, are we diplomatically boxed into a corner where General Asim Munir can, whenever he chooses, trigger a terror attack at some part in India, and you've already de facto announced to the world or signaled to the world your intent that you will strike back somewhere or the other?
No, look, I think, I'm not sure where you get your admiration for him from.
I have no admiration for him. I'm quite disgusted by some of what he's done.
I can only say that, look, at the end of the day, look at the state of Pakistan. And, see the differentials and the capabilities and frankly the reputation on either side. I think, look, we should not get over obsessed and hyphenate ourselves with them. Yes, there is a challenge, there are issues there, we'll deal with it. So, relax, we'll handle it.
Since you spoke of our neighbor in the east, Sheikh Hasina is in India, and in this
by the way, that wasn't the neighbor in the east I had. I had one for.
I'm saying, I'm talking about is in India, and so far we've held off all pressure that's being made by Dhaka to send her back to face trial. How do you see Delhi's relationship with Dhaka play out, given the fact that you've got one very key political player and those in power at the moment have a very different view on her?
Well, what we heard was that people in Bangladesh, particularly those who are now in power, had an issue with how the elections were conducted earlier. Now, this is not our issue. We are a well-wishing neighbor. Now, if the issue was the election, then you would imagine that the first order of business would be to do a fair election, which has to, hopefully something would, election would happen soon. It's their business. But at the end of the day, if the entire issue was about fair elections, then it makes sense that the elections are held. So as far as we are concerned, we wish Bangladesh well. We think as a democratic country, any democratic country likes to see the will of the people ascertained through a democratic process. And, I'm quite confident that whatever comes out of the democratic process would have a balanced and mature view about the relationship, and hopefully things would improve.
And Sheikh Hasina is welcome to stay for as long as she wants?
Well, that's a different issue, isn't it? I mean, she came here in a certain circumstance, and I think that circumstance clearly is a factor in what happens to her. But again, that is something in which she has to make up her mind.
Since you're so fond of cricket, those sitting here at the Leadership Summit have seen Dr. Jaishankar bat on different kinds of pitches over the years. And when it's a flat pitch, his batting is more aggressive. And now when the pitch is trickier, it's good that you're more circumspect and allowing a lot of balls to go through. The theme of the program this year is transforming tomorrow from the lens of diplomacy and foreign affairs. What is the transformation that you're seeking, not just next year, but in time moving forward? And what does transforming tomorrow mean to you, Dr. Jaishankar?
Obviously transforming tomorrow can have a variety of meanings to each person in their own profession or their calling. Or as an Indian, I can think of what tomorrow would mean for India. So if I were to put it all together, I mean, clearly all of us would like to see tomorrow an India which would be economically much stronger, which would technologically be much more so. And I feel, people don't always make that correlation as strongly as they do, which would, build up its manufacturing. That too is a conviction I hold very deeply, that, we should be an industrial power. But from my particular perspective, tomorrow where we are actually able to navigate what I foresee as almost a generation of uncertainty. After all, look at it this way. Many of the assumptions that we held just a few years ago, perhaps the key assumptions are all a question mark. We had an assumption that globalization is here to stay. It is, in a manner of speaking, but it is under severe challenge in many ways. We had an assumption that the United States will always be a stabilizer of the international system. I think that's a very questionable assumption now. We had an assumption, for example, that West Asia, the Middle East, those problems will never change, the landscape will never change. It has undergone a radical change. We had an assumption that technology would be a great unifier. Technology could actually end up as a great fragmenter. So when you look at many of these issues, I think there are really so many uncertainties out there. The best way of dealing with tomorrow, I would say, is capability, capability, and capability. The world will change around us, because often people expect, clarity, and it's like, if you only please so-and-so person, if you only did such and such a thing, it's so, today, so intricate and often so contradictory that the safest thing to bet on is capability. If you have capability, you can handle contingencies, because there will be contingencies, there will be unforeseen circumstances, with growing frequency and growing rapidity and growing seriousness. So to me, when I look at tomorrow, and particularly one looks at what artificial intelligence threatens to bring or expects to bring, I think we'll be in for a change of a kind which we can't even imagine.
How does AI impact diplomacy? How are you preparing within the foreign services for the impact that the technological shifts that AI induces will impact diplomacy?
Well, the first impact of it I saw when more pieces of paper began arriving on my desk, which looked more like me, till I discovered it was ChatGPT. So look,
So your team's coded you into, like they've told ChatGPT and ChatGPT is picking up. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Both. It's a good thing because, in many ways, it captures everything you have done. The problem is it doesn't capture what you intend to do, which may be radically different from what your past record is. So it's a projection. It's not always a prognostication.
In fact, since you refer to ChatGPT, when I put in some of the questions, it also told me what your likely responses are.
Okay.
So there's that. What's your number one resolution for next year, 2026? And does it feature a certain DJT?
Does it feature a
Donald Trump? Donald Jr. Trump. Does it feature Donald Trump? I'm saying, what's your number one resolution for next year? That's the first time I've stumped you since we started.
No. I was just going to say, it isn't 6 weeks. The famous saying, 6 weeks is a long time. So ask me this on the 31st, because, at the pace at which the world is moving, the new year is still far away.
Wow. And imagine somebody who says that trends are set over decades. And in fact, this is a story that Dr. Jaishankar told me recently, that he sleeps and at some point in time he wakes up in the morning to see what all has happened in DC or in the United States, takes a look and it goes back to sleep, and sometimes when you wake up in the morning, more things have happened since. That must be tough are you getting proper sleep given the fact that Donald Trump is keeping you up like several times in the night?
He's not, I assure you. Just, I've always had this habit of being awake and sleeping well at the same time. One part of you is sleeping, one part of you is awake. Because actually, remember, the bulk of the people I work with are not on my time zone. So something is happening somewhere in the world which always impacts you. So it's something you build into your life.
It's so much easier just to critique and to question than to have to deal with the kind of unknowns that are floating around at the moment. You came out to bat at the Hindustan Times Leadership Summit after Hugh Grant. Ladies and gentlemen, would you accept that he did at least as well, if not better? Can we have a round of applause, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. This was a pleasure. Thank you.